ever and ever.
The Shining is hypnotic. I don't even say I like it. I can't help watching it. It's one of those movies where you know you're in for some terrible things are going to happen, but you can't look away.
Kubrick's films do not reveal all of their mysteries at one time.
Red rum. It's underlying story of a father's hate for his child and his wife. The murderous father is a very, very frightening one.
You would never hurt Mommy or me, would you?
There were some moments in the film that were as chilling as anything I've ever seen on film. Just surprising, surreal images.
Great party, isn't it?
The sense of the film was that you ain't seen nothing yet.
The making of The Shining was very much influenced by the same kind of thinking as the making of Clockwork Orange. That Kubrick saw that he was being outpaced in certain areas. Other people were doing things better than him, and he wanted to come in and do something so great that they would be blown out of the water.
Well, that just happens to be exactly what I'm looking for.
Now, Kubrick said you shouldn't worry too much about your successes, you should worry about your failures. Because your failures mean that you're limited in your opportunities for the future. Barry Lyndon is a fabulous film, but unfortunately it didn't make that much money. So he couldn't, after Barry Lyndon, make Napoleon, his dream project. So he had to find a project that would perhaps make him money.
For a long time he'd been interested in not horror stories, but sort of gothic stories, stories that were somewhat sinister, stories that had a slightly mystical, ghostly element.
I don't want to go there, Mrs. Torrance.
Well, how come you don't want to go?
I just don't.
He'd been particularly influenced by a story by Stephen Crane called The Blue Hotel, which he'd read as a young man. And he did like the idea that a person might arrive in such a place with a death wish. So years later, when he was offered The Shining by Warner Brothers, he didn't want to do a conventional horror movie. Then he read a novel by an American writer named Diane Johnson called The Shadow Knows and asked her to adapt the King novel.
He was very literary, and as a serious artist, his understanding was very much more at the thematic and psychological and human level than just wanting some visuals with people sneaking down halls with knives and stuff. He wanted it to make sense in real psychological terms. Just as the great horror tales do, they all have some underlying paradigm which can explain why they touch us or scare us.
When he bought the rights to this story, he knew already that he was going to change it drastically. And when he bought the rights, he reserved the right to do that. That's a very important part.
Stephen King's novel is unashamedly mystical. There are ghosts and horrors in this hotel. It is haunted because it's built on an old American Indian graveyard. Out in the gardens, there are these topiary animals made out of plants which get up and walk around and chase you and so on.
There was always a question about to what extent the supernatural was real. Whether, for instance, a ghost could open the freezer door and let Jack out. And finally, we just had to abide by some inconsistencies, that supernatural things would happen.
He made it much less specific, and again, typical for Stanley Kubrick and his handwriting, not explained. Many things are open-ended. We don't get the classical Gothic horror film answer of a beginning and here's the story and this is how it ends. No, we don't know. It remains full of ambiguity.
Mom?
Well, Stanley said to me, what comes first? It was like the chicken and the egg. The exterior or the interior of the hotel? I said, well, you need the exterior, and then we can base all the interiors on the shape.
The aerial shots of the Overlook Hotel were actually the Timberline Lodge in Oregon, and the close-ups were an exterior set in the UK.
When was the Overlook built?
Construction started in 1907.
Now, Kubrick was a stickler for authenticity. So he sends people out to photograph hotel rooms all over America. And he gets these thousands and thousands of photos, and he says, right, I'll have that room, I'll have that room. And that's how the Overlook Hotel got its rooms and got the different looks for each of the rooms.
Perfect for a child.
He didn't believe in set design. Why should I, he always said, why should I be so egomaniacal to think that of all the rooms that have already been made by all the great architects in the world, why would I suddenly come up with a new and better room? I'll just find either the piece of music that's been written over the last 150 years, or the room, or the shirt, or whatever it is. He just believed in getting the best of it and innovating within that.
The Overlook Hotel itself isn't, doesn't look like the house in the Amityville Horror. It isn't like a frightening house to look at. It doesn't look like the Bates Motel. It's a pretty lodge. But for a sustained chill, it's truly horrifying.
He did like the idea of the Indian graveyard. And because the Irani had all these wonderful Indian motifs, we decided we'd go that route. And I suggested doing a model. So we started building these models to a big scale, 1/2 inch to the foot. And everything became three-dimensional to Stanley. Because we had these models, he worked out a formula where by using certain lighting, like if you used a 2K, that would transfer into so many candles. So he could work out exactly how much lighting he would require for those huge windows.
This place is fantastic, isn't it, hon?
Sure is.
Each window outside had, in the one case, 700,000 watts of lights, just ranked up and down on scaffolds that he built. And the other one, 1,000,000 watts of light, so that the lights can be out here, come through the windows, creating this great whiteout. And it's that kind of light that happens in the high latitudes in winter. This cold light that just fills every part of a space and doesn't fall off, And when they crank those lights on, if you have the freedom to move in every direction, to look around, to follow somebody, to wheel around with them, as you do in life, in real life.
Kubrick at this point was getting very preoccupied with moving camera as well. The Steadicam had just come in, and he was able to get Garrett Brown, the inventor of the Steadicam, to come and work on the film.
It is a way of disconnecting a camera from the bloke who's holding it. In the simplest possible terms, people are always in motion. Cameras need to be immune to that motion. The result is you, the ever-moving guy, can keep moving, and the camera has a separate kind of motion. Whatever you want for it, you can do.
On The Shining, since he built this whole hotel in an English studio, he could race along these corridors with the camera.
Kubrick had in mind these low tracking shots, the Danny Lloyd eye level. So we simply inverted the camera end of it and hung the camera from its top rather than its bottom. And Stanley had a strange wheelchair made for him by a guy named Ron Ford that allowed Stanley handheld to sit in the chair and be pushed around, right? So in particular, on that shot with Danny Lloyd in the big wheel, we contrived this wheelchair shot. And boy, when that lens is 2 or 3 inches off the ground and the carpet is coming by, and then the walls of the set are going by, and it not only has that weird aura of penetrating space, but it also is the great shot of all time for explicating what they're in for in this hotel, how vast it is and how mysterious. And the sound part of it, by the way, was a surprise to Stanley. He had, it hadn't occurred to him, I think, because we were all shocked in dailies to suddenly hear this rug, no rug, rug, no rug. You couldn't hear it unless you had the mic right there.
Nobody liked the topiary animals in the book. First of all, they thought they're hard to do. And this was before CGI was really around. Now, of course, simplest thing in the world. Also, the film was evolving into a much more psychoanalytical frame of mind. And Kubrick, all his life, was a game player. For a while he earned a kind of living playing chess for money in New York as a young man. He was a puzzle solver. And he also had a model of the maze that he kept in his office, and he would work on ways to move the people around. And the Steadicam, of course, was perfect for that.
Look out. I'm coming in close.
The maze set was, of course, one of the most intriguing and one of the most difficult to work in, just physically difficult.
Danny, you win. Let's take the rest of this walking, huh?
I think what they actually built amounted to about 2/3 of the maze that was implied when you saw that model.
We discovered that the best way was to build all the hedges were boxed timber with chicken wire, and we had all this yew, which was supplied by farmers, and it was all threaded into the wire netting and then trimmed, and it was wonderful.
The maze was astonishingly not as big as it looked in the movie, and the size in the movie is courtesy of the lens we used. We used an extremely wide lens called a 9.8, and we're rigorous about keeping it level, because if I tilted that lens at all, it just looked totally unreal. The result was that those boxwoods, or whatever they were, looked about 12 feet tall, when in fact they were probably maybe 8 feet, something like that.
I didn't think it's gonna be this big, did you? No?
There's one shot I'm still trying to figure out how they did, though. And that is basically our introduction to the maze, where Jack's looking at the model, and then it cuts to like this high angle of the maze, and you see them walking through there. It feels too high to be a crane shot. It's pretty high up.
I was present when they did that. They shot the model from a scaffold at the appropriate height, and then they built one center section of the maze next to an apartment block.
Stanley worked all that out. We actually built a rostrum, and we cantilevered this out so we could get the camera right clear of the edge, vertically shooting down to the ground. And to my amazement, Stanley actually climbed out and looked through the camera. And I don't think he realised he was out that far in space. So we shot that.
And they were able to carve out just the little bit they shot from the apartment and superimpose it over the shot of the model.
Danny! We built that first maze up on the highest bit of ground near the studio. But then eventually we put it into the stage, and then it was all snowed up for the snow sequence. And that was hell in that stage, because the formaldehyde that we used on the hedges was like a gas. And it was just like hell. But it all worked.
And the maze was now styrofoamed up to look like snow. They put hundreds of tons of dairy salt on the floor of the maze for snow, wearing boots that got rotted every week because of the salt. You had to breathe the oil smoke, and it was about 90 degrees in there. We could never find out where we were. I mean, we would do the shots. Danny would run, whichever way he felt like, and we just had to follow him. And we were always lost. We always had to shout and have somebody work their way in with a diagram and get us the hell out of there, right?
In fact, Stanley challenged, it was too easy, and he actually got lost in it. We challenged him, we put him in there one Saturday morning, and he couldn't find his way out.
I'm coming down!
The idea of that was, that in the snow you can see footprints. So obviously with a Steadicam you can move through without having to lay track or anything, so you can go through the virgin snow. And the kid is able to actually backtrack in his own footsteps and hide and move along. So it was a perfect device to use for that.
Very effective. You look at it and you think, how else could you really have done it?
Stanley told me the face, it's the most important thing, the face and then the rest. But start with this, cinema is this. And I remember the gesture. And therefore, he also wanted me to have very much input in the makeup and hair, as well as the costumes.
Hello?
In The Shining, Stanley did not really quite tell me how the people should dress, but one thing put him in the right direction was the fact is that, he wanted people to look middle America. He didn't want all the clothes to look too worn out or tired.
Yeah, it's the best place I've ever seen.
And I decided that those characters were a little bit more like almost figurines from a catalog. I mean, in my mind, everything seemed to be so perfect. Everything seems to be pristine. But what's underneath all that?
I think it might be a good idea if you leave your radio on all the time now. Over?
Okay, we'll do that. Everything that could be away from the horror, I tried to do. Anything that could not, in a million years, give indication of darkness.
Of course, I intended to change my jacket this evening before the fish and goose soiree.
Very wise, sir. Very wise.
Stanley was not a director who looked for reality. He was an operatic director. And Stanley said, real is good, interesting is better.
He always worked a lot with actors. I mean, he'd sort of go off in a huddle with whoever, and you could see them talking for a long, long time and really talk things through and chat it through.
Danny, what happened to your neck? Danny, what happened to your neck?
Shelley Duvall actually had a much bigger part in my original script because, of course, I sympathized with her and I gave her things to say. She was involved in trying to figure out what to do.
You did this to him, didn't you?
He was interested in a person that was probably more in love with her partner than her partner was with her, and who was needy in the relationship, and would seem to be able to be perceived as somebody that might tolerate the intolerable longer than one would think that someone might. And she was able to be very needy.
There's someone else in the hotel with us. There's a crazy woman in one of the rooms. She tried to strangle Danny.
I think he saw that, he saw that she was a gifted actress, but he also knew that he wanted her to literally be at the end of her tether, and therefore he was mean to her on the set, and he pushed her harder in order to get the level of kind of hysteria out of her that he felt that the role neaded.
Has it ever occurred to you what would happen to my future if I were to fail to live up to my responsibilities? Has it ever occurred to you? Has it?
Stay away from me.
He felt that he had to create that in his own relationship with her.
I'm very confused.
Kubrick wants the truth, and that authenticity that he puts into all his design is the same with his actors. This is an undervalued part of his films, I feel, because his actors actually exist in the space, in that moment, and he gets them there by whatever means necessary.
God damn.
A lot of trouble went into finding the boy, of course. That was hugely complicated.
Red rum.
Hundreds and hundreds of children were interviewed in the United States. Obviously, we needed an American voice, an American boy. And we finally hit on Danny Lloyd in Peoria, Illinois.
Great thing about this kid, Danny Lloyd, was he was on the program with Jack and Shelley and everybody else. He was there for Stanley as many times as it took.
How'd you like some ice cream, Doc?
The most famous take was in the kitchens, the scene between Scatman and Danny. And it went to 88 takes.
It's like I go to sleep, and he shows me things. But when I wake up, I can't remember everything.
Scatman said, Stanley, I can't do it anymore. Danny was there. So as a result, we didn't feel like we were torturing him, and therefore we could do it and not feel like we were abusing a minor.
And the fact that Danny happened to be called Danny also allowed a certain ease. It cut out one of the barriers between him and the character, that Kubrick was able to say to him, Danny, do this. And I think the two of them had a really good relationship.
You're scared of him to 37-inch.
Kubrick never liked big actors, never liked stars. But when he got around to The Shining, he thought back over actors that he had already thought of using in other films. And his original casting for his Napoleon project, which never got made, was Jack. And also he suited Warner Brothers because he was a bankable name.
I dreamed that I killed you and Danny. Oh, my God.
He thought Jack was a great actor, and Jack is a great actor, and he thought he would be an amazing person who could do the transitional stuff from Jack to Here's Johnny.
What we got involved in was looking at old Nicholson films, and so
That'll do it.
then generated a decision to write a more antic Jack.
I had a lot of discussions with Stanley about how elusive perfection is.
It is very often said, very often in a critical way, that Stanley did so many takes. And this criticism is quite wrong, because first of all, he rehearsed with the camera running. So instead of doing long rehearsals, he just simply called it take one.
Oh, dear, I'm so sorry, sir.
I always said, you know, when you work for Stanley, it removes the main problem for the actor, which is pressure. You know, he's not going to stop until it's exactly the way he wants it, right, wrong, or indifferent. It is going to be right. It's his mother. She interferes.
Jack would give Stanley, in effect, the entire smorgasbord of performance, from catatonic to hysterical. He'd give him every gradation all the way up.
Stanley's investment in a film was investment in time. We had a very frugal operation, usually. Few people, small crews, but we took a long time.
It was a way of getting a lot of material so that second thoughts didn't get lost. Juxtapositions you might not have thought of, you could make work now.
Wendy, baby, I think you hurt my head real bad.
Stanley couldn't understand why you spend all this time and money preparing and getting to the actual moment of filming and then rush through the filming. He just felt that that was backwards, that he'd spent 5 years preparing this picture. He'd spent months and months building the sets. Now it comes to this moment, he's going to do 60, 70 tries to see what happens, even if take 5 is a terrific one.
Just give me one more chance.
The editor told me, you know, he said, I watch these all the time, I could see it happening. He said, first of all, the actor would give a pretty basic, you know, his best shot. And then Kubrick would say, okay, go again, and he'd do it a little more extravagantly, and then he'd hit about 12 or 14 takes in, he'd start to get tired. So he'd start to save himself. And then Kubrick would keep going, and finally the actor had nothing left to give, and Kubrick would still want more. So the actors would start doing crazy stuff.
Come out, wherever you are.
You know, funny faces, screaming, howling. And if you look at Nicholson's performance in the film, they're the scenes you see, the 27th and 29th take. But to get those, he had to work his way through. It's very difficult to say, all right, take one, you're crazy. It won't work.
Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in.
I saw Stanley at St. Albans, and he asked me, how did you like my movie? And I'd only seen it once, and I didn't love Shining the first time I saw it. I have since seen Shining 25 times, one of my favorite pictures. Kubrick films tend to grow on you. You have to see them more than once. And I was telling him all the things I liked about it, and he saw right through me. And he said, well, Stephen, obviously you didn't like my picture very much. Tell me what you didn't like about it. I thought Jack Nicholson, who is a great actor, and I thought it was a great performance, but it was almost a great kabuki performance. It was almost like kabuki theater. He said, you mean you think Jack went over the top? And I said, yeah, I kind of did. And he said, okay, quickly, without thinking, who are your top favorite actors of all time? And I don't want you to think, just name off some names. So I quickly, went Spencer Tracy, Henry Fonda, Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant, Clark Gable. He said, stop. He stopped me. He said, okay, where was James Cagney on that list? And I didn't have it. I thought, well, he's up there high. I said, but he's not in the top 5. He said, you don't consider James Cagney one of the 5 best actors around. You see, I do. This is why Jack Nicholson's performance is a great one.
Here's Johnny!
As far as my wife is concerned, I'm sure she'll be absolutely fascinated when I tell her about it. She's a confirmed ghost story and horror film addict.
A lot of people didn't like it when it first came out because they had read the book. And you knew that it was the house that was the evil spirits inside the house. But in The Shining, you don't know.
Tony, why don't you want to go to the hotel? I don't know. You do too know. Now come on, tell me. I don't want to.
I think to me what gives it that power is that you don't know what really is going on. And to me that's what real horror is all about.
It was a film that seemed always to intend to catch you off balance. Part of its excitement, the unanticipated event.
As soon as you got into the idea of ghosts as being a manifestation of the soul, Kubrick had serious problems with that, because then it comes into the notions of life after death. I think he was more interested in the ghost as an echo, some kind of psychic remnant of the evil that had happened within its walls.
Kubrick took that source material of that novel and did something else with it. Tried to raise more profound and eternal questions about the nature of evil.
Red rum! Red rum! Red rum! Red rum! Red rum! Stop it! Red rum! Red rum!
Horror is across the dinner table, across the breakfast table. Actually, horror is in the family, can be, and often is. And it's always hidden, it's always repressed. It's too frightening for otherwise if we think that the horror is so near home. But it is, and that's what The Shining is about.
Whatever the explanation is, I think we have to get Danny out of here.
The child is so smart, and he leads his father into his own death because he's saving himself.
Your son has a very great talent. I don't think you are aware how great it is.
There are two other characters besides Danny who see things. There's Dick, played by Scatman Crothers, and there's Jack. He sees things. Now it's interesting that Dick says that The Shining is passed from generation to generation. It wasn't Danny's mother who passed it on, because she doesn't seem to be aware of anything that's going on. But it's actually Jack, who is the other person with ESP, who is a receptor, but he has no understanding of the gift that he has. You know, he's blocked.
Did you find anything?
No, nothing at all.
And it's Danny's understanding and his learning throughout the film that helps save his mother.
It's he who kills himself. His own madness consumes him. It's like that line in Full Metal Jacket. It's not the gun, it's the hard heart that kills. That's probably the single most cogent statement in any Kubrick movie, I think.
I always knew when I was working with Stanley that you would be making something that you'd be proud of and that would last, and that's really all the rest of it's about. I mean, I look at him as a, you know, as from personal contact as well as from what I know from others, as a man who really succeeded.
He used cinema to reflect what the world or society was thinking and fearing and experiencing at that particular time. So it's completely contemporary. Quite remarkable. He's a remarkable filmmaker.
That's one of the things I love about Kubrick as a filmmaker. He didn't want people to forget about the movie. He spent a lot of his life making it. He wants people to talk about it. He wants folks to discuss it, argue about it, and take it home. The best horror is the horror that you take home with you.
Ha 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 ha!